Okay, well, why don't we call the meeting to order because it is 5:30. Why don't you go ahead and do a roll call, please?
Hey.
So everybody unmute.
Rick Rogers, excuse. Stephanie Finley.
Here.
John Bridges.
Here.
Molly Olson.
Here.
Angel Aguilar.
Here.
Don Clements. Joe Morlock. Francisco Stoller.
I'm here, and I was muted before. I have to leave at 6:15. I have to go MC something, so I just want to give you a heads up.
Okay. Lonnie Parrish.
I'm here.
Don Griswold.
Yeah, I'm here.
Shannon Buckmaster.
Here.
And Cassandra Olben.
Here.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. So did everybody have a chance to read over the minutes from that June 8th meeting?
Yes.
Did anybody see anything that needed to be changed, added, or removed? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to approve the June 8th, 2020 minutes.
I move that we approve the June 8th, 2020 minutes.
Oh, second.
All right, thank you. All those in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
I am.
All right. Moving on to the new business. We were provided 2 links because one wasn't good enough to link the draft feasibility study. I don't know, Doug, how you wanted to kind of go about the conversation.
So why don't we have Sue pull up PowerPoint, please?
Okie doke.
All right, Sue, next slide, please. All right, so we've gone through the call to order and the roll call, done the consent. So we're on the new business items. So what we're gonna do this evening, I'm gonna cue this up, and then I'm gonna turn it over to Elaine, and she's gonna walk through this final draft of the feasibility study, which includes an executive summary component of it, and then the full feasibility study with all of its attachments. Then I'll go through public comments and if there are any other items from staff or the committee. So that is our agenda for this evening. So Sue, next slide. So I mentioned, so the draft feasibility study, Elaine will go through that. So Elaine, why don't I go ahead and turn it over to you?
Okay. I believe the reason that you received 2 links is we had an executive summary and we had the full feasibility study. And the full feasibility study is more a document that just compiles everything that we've worked on, all of the briefing materials to you and the council. So it basically has everything in it. In the executive summary, we laid out the questions that were given to us at the beginning of this project, which the first one was the study area boundary, did it meet both the assessed value and acreage limitations set out by statute? And yes, this study area complies with both of those limitations. Established that blight occurs in the study area, and it confirms that yes, the list of improvements verify that there are blighting conditions within the study area, and then examine the financial feasibility of the area, and the bulk of the feasibility study does that examination of the financial feasibility, and it specifies which tables in the full study match that. And then to examine the impacts of the taxing districts as a result of creating the area. In the executive summary, we just put in the 3 most pertinent tables, one that shows the full tax increment finance forecast for the different projected annual growth scenarios. And then we have the two tables for the estimated impacts to both the general government and education taxing districts. And then it, of course, shows the map and then outlines if City Council decides to proceed, what the next steps would be in that process. We did receive a comment from the chair about table 3, which shows the estimated impact to the education taxing districts. He suggested one of 3 actions. I think one was getting rid of that table. The second one was noting the impacts to the schools and the education service district are indirect due to the state school fund, and then noting that in 2 different ways. So I don't know if we should talk about that now, or if you want me to go through the full feasibility study first. Chair, what would you like to do at this point?
I think we can defer that till after you
Okay.
go through everything.
Okay, great. Then the full feasibility study, as the chair said, becomes quite a large document, and it's mostly just to help staff and city council have everything in one place if they want to look at it, or people, any of the stakeholders want to see the full process that we've gone through. So it has a definition section, executive summary, background, information about the advisor committee, information about the city council briefings, planning commission briefings, public engagement, the boundary option, the potential projects, how we did the financial analysis in terms of determining the tax rates and forecasting the growth and assessed value, and then calculating the potential tax increment revenue and revenue sharing, identifying the different impacts to the taxing districts, talking about what would constitute blight findings, and then going through the next steps. So as we talked about at our June 8th meeting, all of that we have gone through with you. There's nothing new in these materials. There is a section in the full study that's left open for the meeting tonight that says what your recommendation will be. So depending on what this committee decides to recommend, we'll fill in that, and then we will attach tonight's briefing materials also. So those are the 2 things, other than if anybody has any other changes they want to recommend. Those are the other 2 things that we know that we will do to update the document before it goes to City Council. So I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Elaine, this is Doug. So we have 2 versions of the executive summary. One does not have the fact sheet in it.
Okay.
The other executive summary does have the fact sheet in it.
Okay.
And then we've got the full study. So it's kind of 3 different tools depending upon who we're talking to, level of information. Sue, you want to go to the next slide? There. So I think this is the opportunity for the committee members to provide feedback. The chair has noted in the executive summary, there was 1 word under section 2, striking 2 words after the words table 5. It says as shown. He suggested striking those. And then as Elaine said, he made some recommendations or suggestions for the executive summary. So Mr. Chair, you want to explain your comments?
Sure. I'm assuming that the 2-word edit is just not a problem.
Not a problem. No, it's fine.
Okay. So table 3 is the total estimated impacts to education taxing districts.
Yes.
And I guess my question was, first, is there some legal requirement that table needs to be in the executive summary?
There isn't a legal requirement. The information we were tasked with in our feasibility study did talk about impacts to taxing districts. So when I put that together, that's why I put those tables in, because it does show what those impacts are. I thought I had put in the couple sentences that I always put in about the school district and the education service district being part of the state school fund. So when I read that comment and I went back and looked, I was surprised that it wasn't there, because I try to always put that information in. So I'd like to hear from the rest of the committee about what they want to do, but I am totally okay with putting that information in. I usually put it in, and I'm really glad you caught that. For some reason, I didn't get that put in on this.
So just to bring the other people up to speed, my comment to Doug and Elaine essentially was that I didn't want to have table 3 in the executive summary, because I think the executive summary is the most likely thing that people are going to read. And I think table 3 is misleading, because it suggests that all of these resources are going to be removed from the school districts, which is exactly the law change that is significantly different today than it was the last time we went through this. Although the state funds all those things, so they fill in almost the entire amount that theoretically is this tax increment. And so the impact on the schools is very, very minor. And this table essentially suggests just the opposite. And I think it's going to be something that people will latch on to. And so I was saying to Doug and Elaine, let's just remove table 3. And, I thought that was the best idea. The second best idea was to put her 3 or 4 sentences that might say the state funding for schools, it comes through the general fund, and it's a per student amount throughout the whole state, and therefore there'll be minimal impacts on the schools. And if you want to see theoretically what the impact would have been without that rule, look at footnote number 1 and put the table in a really small data point in somewhere else. I thought that was kind of the middle ground. And then the worst thing is to just have this table floating out by itself. I guess my third item, the worst item, was to have this table and immediately before it put in all caps, the following table is not an accurate representation about the impacts on schools, because state law funds on a per pupil basis.
So just one clarification, that's just for the Newburgh School District and Willamette Education District. So the Portland Community College is a direct impact. So if for some reason folks wanted this change so that the 2 that are part of the state school fund are treated differently, we would have to figure out how to reformat the table, because the community college is a direct impact. So,
well, and that's fine. Then I would just say remove Willamette Education District and Newburgh School District and just leave the PCC line item, and that's it.
Is the school district representative on the call tonight?
He just came on.
Yeah, I'm here.
So did you hear any of the preceding conversation, or did you miss it?
Yes. No, I heard it.
So how do you think is the best way to deal with John's question?
Well, I understand what John's saying from an optics perspective, when it comes in and people are going to read the executive summary and forget much of the other report. But I worry a little bit about just removing parts of it and not the others, just because I don't want it to be, I don't want it to seem like we're hiding other things away. I think an explanatory note would be more important, saying that, because of Measure 5 and state school fund being done at a state level. I think just explaining that whole state level process, even if it takes a few more lines, would be really important to say, this is a direct impact to one, but not to our ESD and to our school district, because people will also they're going to freak out if they think their school district's going to lose millions of dollars over this in that way. So I guess I'd be favoring in keeping the chart whole. Whether or not we include it in the early part is maybe different, but I don't think I would take parts of it out. I think I would just explain them more carefully so people understand that. And it's hard to explain anyway, just to talk about state school fund and how those things all operate, and local and state revenues.
Right.
Comment? I think what John's reacting to and what I reacted to when I heard your comment is we're saying this accurately represents the impact. And Elaine, what you're saying is it accurately represents the impact to the community college.
Correct.
So that can be a table that is labeled impact to community college. That's appropriate and accurate. It's not accurate to label the parts that are actually not an impact. So if you change the title, or if you separate the two and show both, and the Newburgh School District and the, I apologize, the other school district.
Willamette, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this is the state supplied funds that will, Elaine, you can do a better job of a title than I ever could, but this is the state will then make this part whole. So there is no impact. However, there is an impact to the community college. I agree with Joe that if it looks like we're trying to pull a fast one, there's plenty of people who are nervous out there.
Yeah.
Although I do want to be clear that it's not a zero impact. I mean, these are dollars that go to the state school fund overall and then are distributed out. And so those dollars, whichever ones don't go in, are felt as part of the overall formula. So it's not a zero impact. Just that.
Yeah.
Whatever we look at for making the chart is fine, but it's not a zero impact.
And generally what we say is that the impact is indirect because the impact is on the state school fund, not on the school district itself or on the education service district. And then we say that the state school fund allocates funding to schools on a per pupil basis, and that urban renewal in any one community impacts the state school fund as urban renewal in any community. So we can't say that it becomes nothing, but when we talk to the state school fund, they also say that they can't quantify that it is something because of the backfill. So it's and that's why we just we try to be just very clear that it's an indirect impact. It's an impact on the state school fund, but the state school fund's funded by other sources in addition to property tax revenues, and it's funded on a per pupil basis.
Hey, Elaine, how much, if you look at the overall state fund, and then you look at the part that's not coming in because it's going into urban renewal,
Right.
What percentage change to the state school fund would that be?
We looked at that a number of years ago. I haven't looked at it this year, and I don't have that number in my head. And maybe the school district knows that. Do you know that?
Do I know what the impact would be on a per pupil basis number?
No, what's the whole state fund? The point that I'm trying to get to, Joe, and it may be a bad point, is that if we say that the impact is that the state fund will be reduced by 0.05%.
Right.
In other words, it's not a big impact. That would be a way of quantifying for people the impact to the whole state fund, which is where we get the dollars per pupil from. That was all.
This is Cassandra. I think that would be a moving target because you have to aggregate every single urban renewal district in the entire state. And that amount fluctuates year per year to really calculate the impact to the school fund and then, and then proportion that out.
Right.
But I agree with the fact that I feel like removing it all together lacks transparency, and I would be in favor of keeping the table with the disclaimers that you've all mentioned and that you typically include.
So I guess as you're talking about this, I kind of now understand. You're trying to show why you have a particular number in table 1, and you table 2 is to say,
What's
hey, part of
0.05?
the total
That's
that will
percent.
be available for the city
So divide that by 100.
is the
Nine.
table 2 amount, and then we aggregate the table 3 amount. I think that is a good thing to show. But what I think is a better point to make is to think about it in terms of communication, saying that this is not what's taken away from the school. These charts are here to show you what can be aggregated to help the renewal district.
Right.
But understand this number, although it's used to aggregate for the renewal district, is not removed from the school funding. Instead, that comes back to the school through the general funding of schools in the state of Oregon. The problem, I think, is it's very hard to explain.
It is hard to explain. But
Yeah,
there's set language that we use in every urban renewal plan that's 3 or 4 sentences long, and I think I have most of it in the full feasibility study. That we'll just pull that into here. We'll go ahead and separate out the community college because it is direct, and we'll just talk about, so we'll have 3 tables here instead of 2 to do the impacts, and the third table will be indirect impacts, and have that language that talks about the state school fund. And just so everybody knows, that state school fund's impacted by enterprise zones. That's the same kind of impact on property tax revenues. It's impacted by the vertical housing abatement zones, any tax abatements for housing. And so typically when we get into conversations about that, we say, the legislature knows that these other things all have impacts because they're taking away this property tax revenue. They also know that they have the state school fund to fill. So it's a policy decision in the legislature's hand about how they fund that state school fund and what they allocate as the per pupil funding formula. And that's not, and that changes, every year. It's not like a property tax rate that is set and everybody knows what that's going to be over time. So.
Right, and that just for an illustration, that 0.05% is about $4.5 million because it's a $9 billion budget currently for education. Before we go into the major reductions that we will find out in August sometime, but right now it's set at $9 billion, so a 0.05% ends up being about $4.5 million.
And I know the impact from urban renewal is higher than that.
Right. But that was the question that Molly asked about a 0.05 impact.
Right.
So the $9 billion is the current state school fund.
Right. And like Cassandra said, that number changes every year depending on what each urban renewal area takes as their division of taxes for that year. So
Just
it's
a thought.
moving target.
Sorry.
Go
Just
ahead.
a thought there. When you're doing Q&As, because John's right, this is going to be misconstrued. People are going to take this out of context and run with it. Those that are constitutionally against urban renewal. And he's experienced that before, which is why I think he's wise to it.
Right.
So we could have a Q&A that said, for a education budget of $9 billion, this amount would be 0.05% or whatever it is, a reduction at the state level, as an example, not as what it's going to be. And then a disclaimer that says, it's just a way of explaining, like when we were talking about the property tax increase for the budget committee, it was actually 0.03% increased property tax or something like that. But it was 3% of the total. People kept talking about 3%. So I think if you have an example that translates it back to dollars, it sort of helps people put it in context, that's all, but not in a document.
That's a good idea.
Well, and the other piece is that this, like the 31 million listed under the 5%, that's over 30 years, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so it's in any given year, it's $1 million.
That's right. You have to go back if we were going to do a Q&A on that for next year, we would we would go back and say, you know, the first year projected impact on the state school fund is X. So for that 1 year, and compare that to the 9 billion, whatever
Right.
that it is.
So what percentage is 1 million
Right.
of
It's-
9 billion?
Right.
It's going to be 0.0000 something.
Right.
Well, I guess to move on from this point, what I'd love to do, Elaine, is see your other table and see that language.
Sure. Yep, I'll put that together and have Doug send it out to folks and get your input on it.
Okay.
It will need to be a relatively quick turnaround.
I can do it tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I've got to have staff reports submitted by the end of the day, Thursday,
Okay.
for the July 20th council meeting.
Okay. I can do it first thing in the morning, and then Doug can send it out to the committee for you to look at, and you can get back to Doug and let you know whether the language looks okay or not.
Is it possible, Doug, to for us to give our vote to John or something like that, so that you can get a quick turnaround as opposed to waiting for mail from however many of us there are?
I would prefer, I'll send it out to everybody, and I'll give you a deadline of 5 p.m. on Wednesday for any comments.
Okay.
So kind of moving on, they submitted to us an executive summary without the fact sheet and an executive summary with the fact sheet. I just wanted to invite a conversation about whether we should have it with or without. What are people's thoughts on that?
John, this is Cassandra. I liked the idea of having the fact sheet in there just because, to your point earlier, a lot of people will just seek that executive summary as their means of understanding the plan. So I feel like more information or kind of a primer is valuable, but it's not a make it or break it thing for me.
I kind of agree with Cass for what it's worth. I think it's nice to have, but if there's some reason you don't want it, it's not a deal breaker.
No, I want it, but I just don't want to step all over everybody's toes.
I think it's good to have it.
Okay.
Because they
I'm
will.
good
They'll
with it.
just grab that summary and breeze through it and not understand and take the scary stuff and run. So.
All right. So then I think, Doug, are we at the point where we want to choose item 1 or not, item 2? Or is there further discussion that needs to be had?
I would, Mr. Chair, I'd ask the committee if they have any further comments on either the executive summary or the full report before we progress on to the recommendation.
Okay, so let's open it up to that. Does anybody have any other comments on any of those things, assuming we're going to go with the executive summary with the fact sheet included? Does anybody have any comment, questions, or concerns about any of the executive summary with fact sheet and the full report?
This is Cassandra. The only thing that I had some curiosity about is I saw that there was a reference to revenue sharing in section 12 on page 17, describing how revenue sharing worked, but there's no other mention in the executive summary or in the feasibility study on the prospect of having a revenue sharing option in the plan. And maybe that's something that you would actually include in the plan itself. So maybe this is premature, but I know from our taxing district's perspective, we would be interested in having whatever future plan there is to include some mention of possibility for revenue sharing.
So typically, you're right, Cassandra, that decision is made as you progress and start developing the actual plan. But I think that information from you is important because for example, we just did a plan out in Lincoln City where we did revenue sharing, and it ended up making the plan go 2 years longer, but there was a 15% revenue sharing every year throughout the plan. That it hasn't been finally voted on, but it's something that we vetted with the taxing districts, and some of them liked that and some of them didn't like it. And so I think that's great information. And as we move forward, if City Council says to move forward, that would be a good conversation piece for this committee to have, is if you want to make a recommendation on the revenue sharing.
So maybe it'd be a good idea. Let's assume that we choose one, and let's assume that the city goes along with us. I mean, if we choose two and the city goes along with us, we're really done, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, so let's make the assumption that we choose number one and the city agrees with that idea. What would be the next steps, and just briefly encapsulate what's involved in those different steps?
Well, the next step would be if this committee formulates a recommendation with option number one, then that recommendation goes to the city council on July 20th. So on July 20th, and John, you'll be invited to participate. We're going to do a work session at 6 o'clock with the city council on the feasibility study. We're going to have about 45 minutes to 50 minutes to go through that. Then we're going to go into the regular business session, and they will have a staff report, and it will include this committee's recommendation. If that recommendation is, yes, it's feasible, and requesting the council to create an urban renewal agency, then I would come back in August to the city council with an ordinance to create an urban renewal agency. Kind of in parallel with that, I would be working with Elaine so that we would start the work on the plan and the report.
And this committee stays live through that. So you have additional meetings that we haven't yet calendared, but anticipate having your input, because we've got to look at that project list and pare it down to the actual maximum indebtedness amount. So we've got to figure out which projects to put in. We can look at the revenue sharing component. We have to develop goals and objectives that we would pull from the existing documents. So there's still work for this group to vet, to add input to. And then there is still public input that unfortunately we haven't been able to hold. We've been doing our best trying to get information out virtually, right? And Doug will talk about that next, but still then also getting public input in the plan and report development phase.
Yeah, so there's a good, as Elaine and I have talked about, there's another 6 to 8 months worth of work if there's a recommendation and council accepts that, to create an agency and accept the feasibility study. As we've talked about before, there's steps of the consult process, and there's new statutory provisions on a timeline for that. There's activities I need to do with the Yamhill County, because part of this plan area is outside the city limits, but within the urban growth boundary. So there's a lots of things that would take place after the first of the year on those overlapping taxing district coordination, but there's a lot of work that would occur between August and the end of December, maybe into January, with this committee creating that plan and report with all those elements that Elaine was talking about.
Okay, so that was helpful. Thank you for that. So I think maybe it's appropriate to talk about the outreach before we say what our recommendation is or discuss our recommendation.
Okay, I can do that quickly. Sue, do you want to go down a couple of slides? And then we'll have to back up after that.
Go one more. Yeah.
There you go. So, you know, we've been putting information up on the website. We have the community engagement plan. We have the fact sheet that we've been sharing. Since our last meeting or so, we've been to 3 of the farmers markets. We've handed out somewhere around 450 flyers to people who've been attending that in both English and in Spanish. So I'd like to thank Angel and John and Francisco for assisting in doing that. I know I stood out in the heat. It was fun, talked to a lot of people. Social distancing in measure. Also outreach to the service clubs. So I sent it to the Kiwanis. They sent it out to their membership. I'm going to do a presentation to the Kiwanis on July 9th. It was sent to the Rotary, and it was pushed out to Early Bird and Noon Rotary Club. Also sent it to leadership of the City Club. They're supposed to be sending it out. Shannon, it's not a mark against you. I did this slide before. The chamber pushed it out in their weekly newsletter, and they're going to do that for the next 4 weeks. They were in transition of moving. The chamber, through its government affairs, it got pushed out to them today. And the utility bill, that came up at the last meeting. So we're actually putting something, it's not an insert, but there's language that we're putting in the monthly utility bill that will provide a link to be able to go to the webpage for the Urban Renewal Program. You may ask, what kind of feedback have I gotten? I have directly received no email communications in response. I've received no phone calls. When I was out at the Wednesday market, the farmers market, people responded interestingly when we were talking about revitalization of downtown and the riverfront. Some people commented, but really cool to redevelop the riverfront area. The downtown, the comments were addressing new buildings, infill development. So that's what I've heard in the last 3 weeks.
Doug? Doug, this is Shannon Buckmaster. Could I put an offer on the table to help with community promotion?
Sure.
So with our, with the Yamhill County Commissioner Forum, we were actually able to put together a virtual forum where we had Q&A. It was moderated. It was very efficient with the time. We could certainly do something like that as well. Just do it as a special event when you're ready to do this. And we could set it up for screen sharing. Like I said, it's really simple to have community members submit their questions to the chat so we can filter and direct some of those questions. But that could be an opportunity for us to really not have it lost in emails or passive messaging, but put an active spotlight on this. So basically like a Rotary program, except the chamber is going to host it and we're going to make it a special event and promote it as such.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
I'm up to that task.
Of course you are.
Add it to my list.
All right, excellent. So if you would like to send me a few dates, then we can put it together. Of course, the chamber would host it. We have capacity up to 100. Do you think we'll need more than 100? Will more than 100 people log in for this?
I would assume no.
Okay, because if there is, we can upgrade our account even for a one-time event.
Okay.
You know, just anecdotally for the group, I handed out the flyers for a couple hours, I guess two markets ago. And first off, probably 90% of the people took the flyers. Probably 5 or 6% of the people that didn't take the flyers indicated that they had obtained the flyer the prior week. People seemed interested in it, and a number of people did specifically comment about redevelopment in both downtown and the riverfront, and they were already aware of the subject matter. So I think I only got really one negative comment.
Francisco, you still on?
Yeah. I was just gonna chime
Any
in.
feedback?
Yeah, my experience was basically the same as John's. There's only one guy that got real mad for no reason, and then I gave him your email address, Doug. So hopefully you get an email. But
Of the
but yeah,
hundreds I get a day, Fran.
yeah, right. Well, but yeah, no, everyone was, fairly interested in it. You kind of feel like you're out there to sell something or whatever, but I'm just like, hey, this is just informational. This is kind of what we're doing. This is what we're thinking. It's the direction it's going, and it's not going to raise your property taxes and blah, 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 like that type of thing. And they were, it seemed like it was well received.
Angel, your feedback?
I think I echo the feelings that have been expressed already. It was generally well received, and at least there was information for them to look at further.
And Doug, I also took a couple shifts when it was later and it was quieter at the market, and it's very similar to John's. So I didn't get any negative one, especially in the younger crowd. They were very excited about the idea of the riverfront being developed, and so positive.
So Doug, I don't know if this is an appropriate time for a question, and that is, this is going relatively smooth from my perspective, the whole process, and what lies ahead that has the potential of having this plan derailed and not come to fruition like it's happened times before.
Well,
and that's a question that can be tabled, and we can address it another time or whatever. But that's a question that is going through my mind.
I think, Angel, it's one, now we're just looking at the feasibility of being able to do this. I think when we get into the plan and report development of it, and you start looking at specific projects that can be funded in whole or in part, what projects might be eliminated from the list. It has the potential for parties to step up and say, well, I was really interested in this project or this project. How come it didn't make the list? I think there's always the possibility that people can step up, and I think the chair brought this up early on in our meetings, is people continuing to potentially look at it, it's raising my property taxes. And so it's that continuing of that message. And so we have JLA on board to help us through the plan and the report phase of this, to help do additional community outreach efforts. And then we have Lacey in-house to also help get that message out. And so where Elaine put together the PowerPoint with the voiceover, we've got some funds budgeted in the next phase to actually do a video. I know the group talked something like what Tiger had done. We don't have those kind of financial resources, but some type of video to, again, help educate the citizens and the businesses in the overlapping taxing districts about the urban renewal program.
So do you feel like you got enough of an answer there?
I'm thinking the ultimate decision is being made at the council level, right?
Yes.
And at what point can it go before the community for a vote? At what point does it get out of the council's hand and now it goes the community at large, where everybody speaks up and everybody votes on the issue?
Elaine, you want to respond to that one?
So there's two things that can happen.
Okay.
Sometimes somebody needs to take off. Does anybody want to vote on that motion before he has to leave, or has he already left? I guess I was just looking at the chat.
I would appreciate, Elaine, if people have enough information, if we could vote on the motion. I also have a conflict. I thought it would be shorter tonight because I thought we did all this discussion last time. Apologies.
So, Mr. Chair, you want to step back to the recommendation?
Yeah, why don't we table the other stuff and let's pull back 2 screens, I think it was, to the ultimate recommendation. Does the group feel like they have to have further discussion about the issue between these 2 choices? Okay, if there's no need for further discussion, then I would entertain a motion to either approve item number 1 as our recommendation or item number 2 as our recommendation.
I so move for number 1 on the recommendation.
All right, anybody want to second that motion?
Second.
Any further conversation about it? Then I'm sorry, was someone chiming in there? Okay.
If we, Mr. Chair, if we do the vote, if we could have, I'll do a roll call vote, so I make sure I capture everybody.
Sure.
That would be helpful.
Why don't we go ahead and do that now? So everybody get ready to be able to unmute your your microphone. So go ahead, Doug, and do the roll call vote.
Stephanie Finley,
Yes.
John Bridges,
Yes.
Molly Olson,
Yes.
Angel Aguilar,
Yes.
Joe Morlock,
Yes.
It's probably ours. No, sorry.
Francisco Left, Lonnie Parrish,
Yes.
Don Griswold,
Yes.
Shannon Buckmaster,
Yes.
and Cassandra Oven.
Yes.
Unanimous, Mr. Chair.
All right. Great job, everybody. Thank you for the work you've done so far and set yourself up for more work. You know, I'm not sure that we need to, do you want to, Angel, do you want to hear kind of the 2 different routes that it could end up with a vote by the electorate?
I can go over it quickly.
Okay, why don't you do that, Elaine?
So the first is sometimes people will ask the city council to themselves put it out for a vote. So city council can choose, instead of adopting a plan on their own, to put it out for a vote. That doesn't typically happen, but it could happen. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 is it's a non-emergency ordinance that the city council votes on. Any non-emergency ordinance may be go to referendum. It goes to referendum by whatever standard is in your city code of getting a certain amount of signatures on a petition. And if you get a certain amount of signatures, then it goes out for a public vote. So I've only actually had that happen once in my 15 years of doing this. So I know it can happen, but it doesn't happen often.
All right.
And that's it. I mean, there's you mentioned a non-emergency. There's nothing here that's emergency about this that the council will have to say this emergency decision, whatever. So that would be the only way to go. Okay. Now, are there is there knowledge of the previous groups or individuals that were opposing this effort in the past that might still be of the same mindset today, that they may present a threat in that regard?
Well, if you want to discuss that, maybe you could figure out a time that you and I can talk.
All right, let's do that, John.
Okay. So having that successful motion, Doug, what else do we have to cover today?
If we went to slide 7, we had the one about the videos. And so we've talked about the videos on a number of occasions. And so those are out there. We're continuing to push information out. We will do that all the way up to getting to the council in July. So that was just a real quick one. And then the next slide is our last one, just on the next steps. And I've kind of touched on this. I will be giving the city council a briefing on their council goal, which their council goal is to create and support an urban renewal plan and authority. So they will get an update from me. I will update the Planning Commission on July 9th at their meeting. Taxing districts meetings. I have found that I'm having some challenges trying to find a date, so I'm working individually with the other taxing districts and setting up conversations and sharing information, and I will have that done by July 20th as well. And then presentations on the feasibility study and the action plan occurs and the recommendation on July 20th at the work session in the business session.
Okay, that sounds good. Does anybody have any comments or questions about that timeline? I assume we don't have any public comments. Is there anything further from the staff?
Nothing from staff.
All right, anything further from any of the committee members? All right, well, I think we can give ourselves a small little pat on the back so that we've made this next little hurdle. Hopefully things will go smoothly on July 20th. And then we'll probably reconvene somehow by email to figure out when we'll get together or reschedule our next meetings.
Yes, I will, after the 20th, depending on what the council's decision is, then anticipate you'll get an email from me. Elaine and I will have to work on a schedule, a proposed schedule for activities moving forward. We had a conversation about timeline earlier today as well on that. So more to come, Mr. Chair.
Okay, excellent. Well, then I think we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, good work.